The first session is called The Continuing Search for the Truth, Decades Waiting for the Answer. Before I hand over to my colleague, senior fellow here at the Institute, Stuart, who is introducing the first items on the agenda, I've been asked to explain to our remote participants at the end of session one, you will have an opportunity to put questions to Stuart and to the two other speakers in this session, Henning Melba and Alana O'Malley. I regret that it won't be possible for you to ask questions directly of our speakers because there are so many of you and because of the various technical constraints. We're asking for you to put your questions, please, into the chat, and your questions can be read out. And then the chat will be preserved and made available to Justice Ottman's investigation, so your comments won't be lost. And we do place some importance on capturing those comments. So when you put a question in the chat, please give your name and any relevant information about your role and work so that we can identify who's asking the question. And on that note, I'll hand over to Stuart. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Kingsley. Susan Williams has described the death of Dag Hammarskjöld as like a jigsaw with thousands of pieces. Some fit together easily, others do not, and it is clear that many more vital pieces are still missing. For many years, it was the eyewitness accounts of local Black Africans, now Zambians, which were excluded as coming from unreliable witnesses on account of the colour of their skin. But at the outset, let us now hear one of those missing voices, courtesy of a BBC World Service interview. This is the late Mama Chibesa Kankasa, someone who was part of the struggle against colonial rule and later became a minister in Zambia's first independence government led by Kenneth Kaunda. This is her testimony.
When we heard that Dag Hammarskjöld is going to have a meeting in Ndola, we were very happy because we looked at Dag Hammarskjöld as a peacemaker. We waited for quite long. After that, then my husband called me. My wife, come out of the house, come quickly. And he was showing me to the western side of Ndola. We saw two small planes going back to the airdrome. Then I saw a very big smoke. My husband told me that my wife, tonight, it has happened something which shall never be forgotten in the history of this country. Dag Hammarskjöld is being shot, he's dead.
So
that is the flame you are seeing.
When he saw that, he was sure in his own mind that that is what had happened.
Yeah, that time. In the morning, my husband rang the DC of Ndola. He was trying to tell him that something has happened in your town. But the DC didn't want to reply to him, just bang the telephone.
He put the telephone down. He didn't want to hear your husband's testimony.
Yeah. We saw now an ambulance plane going towards the scene. They started now carrying the bodies from that scene to the mortuary. And according to what we heard now, out of those people who died from the plane, there was one who was still breathing. And when they reached the Ndola hospital, that man says, I heard a bang. And that was the last words he said before he died. So truly speaking, according to my husband and myself, we were definitely sure that Hammarskjöld was shot. Later on, the UN delegation came for the investigation. My husband gave the testimony in the court of law at Ndola High Court. He mentioned me that when I saw it, I called my wife to come and witness to what I saw. The UN team came home, and I gave that same testimony I gave to whoever asked me.
Why do you think then, to this day, the official version is that it was pilot error, that it was an accident rather than an assassination?
No. According to what we saw, he was killed.
Do you think it is important, would be appropriate now to reopen, to have a new investigation into Dag Hammarskjöld's death 50 years on?
Precisely, because some of us, we are still living.
So you would willingly go into a court of law now and tell your story again?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Well, sadly, she is no longer in a position to do that. The new evidence that has been unearthed in recent years has discredited old narratives of pilot error in the crash of the Albertina, and has painted a far more disturbing figure, a far more disturbing picture. The painstaking work, which has involved a number of those in this room and online, has reached as far as the United Nations and given fresh impetus to the world body's own inquiries. On that journey, as Kingsley has reminded us, the work of the independent Dag Hammarskjöld Commission has been crucial in sifting the evidence and pointing to new lines of inquiry. The independent commission was supported by the Hammarskjöld Inquiry Trust, led by Lord Lee, and set up to provide financial and administrative backing for the commission. Among a distinguished group of trustees, some of them present here, was Chief Emeka Anyoko, whose office I headed when he served as Commonwealth Secretary General for 10 years. Chief Anyoko's abiding support for the search for truth is instructive. In 1961, he was a fervent young African nationalist, his own country, Nigeria, newly independent. 2 years later, he took up his first diplomatic posting as part of Nigeria's permanent delegation at the United Nations. He was inspired by the activism and commitment that Hammarskjöld brought to the UN and to the causes of peace and justice which Hammarskjöld espoused. For Anyoko, our work today is not an academic discussion of a historical footnote. It is about the security and the safety of those who are at the service of the international community. It is about the integrity of the offices that they hold, including the very highest, and our collective purposes and the safeguarding of those. It is therefore a vital living principle. So now let me finally turn to the submission from Sir Stephen Sedley, Chair of the Independent Hammarskjöld Commission, 2012 to 2013. And it begins: a judicious inquiry. At a time when statutory public inquiries are underway in the UK into the contaminated blood disaster, the COVID pandemic, the Grenfell Tower disaster, and the Post Office Horizon scandal, it's useful to remember that there is no single model for an effective inquiry. The four I have mentioned are being chaired by retired judges of the High Court or Court of Appeal. We do not know what will happen if one of them dies before reporting. But for as long as it takes, they are empowered to take evidence on oath, to compel the production of documents, and to allocate rights of advocacy. In other words, statutory inquiries tend to mimic judicial proceedings. The cost to the public purse of such inquiries is astronomical. More relevantly, there is little to support the belief that witnesses are more truthful when required to testify on oath. Indeed, our own judicial experience suggests that the effect of the oath on habitual liars is to prompt them to lie more vigorously. For these and other reasons, I was not dismayed when in 2012, David Lee approached me about undertaking a non-statutory and therefore non-judicial investigation of the 1961 Ndola disaster. I agreed on condition that I had a professional secretariat and could assemble a suitable panel to form the commission. I was able without difficulty to persuade 3 international respected judicial colleagues, Justice Wilhelmina Thomason, Ambassador Hans Corell, and Justice Richard Goldstone, to join me. I mention this because, in my view, it afforded a greater range and depth of judicial experience than any single judge-led process could have done. It was a judicious, albeit not a judicial, inquiry. At no point did we find the absence of judicial powers a problem, but without our salaried part-time secretary, B. Randall, and the voluntary services of a specialist firm of London solicitors, Field Fisher, I don't think we could have produced a report of much value. In the event, I was able to record interviews in London with possibly significant witnesses, including Commander Charles Sobel and Sir Brian Unwin. Richard Goldstone and I travelled with our secretary to Zambia, where we interviewed local people who had seen more than one aircraft's lights on the approach path to Ndola. In the course of this, we were able to resolve the mystery of what charcoal burners were doing in the forest at midnight. The one thing that defeated Richard Goldstone and me was the huge dish of chops which Mama Kankasa put on the table when we went to interview her. Much of the Commission's work was necessarily ground clearing, for example, dealing with the inevitable "it was me" claims. But this left many questions open. As you know, we gave an affirmative answer to the overarching question we had undertaken to answer, namely, whether the evidence which was now available would justify the UN in reopening its own inquiry. Notwithstanding our informal procedure and unofficial status, the UN accepted our reasoned advice and appointed a retired judge of international distinction, Mohamed Chande Othman, a former Chief Justice of Tanzania, to pursue the evidential issues. We hope that our work, limited as it was, has in this way contributed to an eventual answer to Susan Williams's big question: who killed Hammarskjöld? I speak for all 4 members of the Commission when I say that while we were able to reach no concluded view on who was responsible for the death of Dag Hammarskjöld and the other passengers and crew of the DC-6, we are all now certain that it was not accidental. We share the frustration of Justice Othman and of the considerable number of researchers here today at the continuing withholding of information and documentation by states which might have expected to share our objectives. In spite of the continuing voids and contradictions in what is now known, a great deal has transpired since we reported in 2013, and it is this that brings today's participants together. On behalf of the former Hammarskjöld Commission, I wish you all possible success in an endeavour which is still far from merely academic. And that concludes his presentation.